right. We are live now officially on all of our platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Really excited to get this one going. Today's topic is parenting through trauma. And I'm so thrilled to welcome back Dr. Dowtin to our Q&A series. Dr. Dowtin serves on our medical advisory board. And I'll have you introduce yourself and your, credentials and career history, because you're doing absolutely amazing work. I know within the scope of your own practice that you've built, as well as, really cultivating, and elevating the profession of NICU psychologists and things like that. So I can't speak to it and give it justice as you can. So I'd love for you to give a little bit about your career and all the great work that you're doing in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Dr. LaTrice L Dowtin, and pronouns she, her. So my trajectory. So I think I started off just always knowing that I wanted to work with children, and that's where my training initially came from. And then I just kept going lower and lower for working with children. So younger ages, early childhood development, early childhood education. I have a teaching background as well. And one of my training experiences was doing developmental assessments for young children. So it was NICU follow-up. And then one of my lovely mentors, supervisors, was a NICU psychologist who did stuff in the NICU. And I tagged along one day because she's like, oh, sure. And then I was hooked on working in the NICU and working with perinatal populations as well as young children and infants. And I conceptualize myself as a trauma interventionist, so a trauma psychologist in that way. So everything under the umbrella of trauma, I really like to be able to support and help and learn about and nourish, right? Because we have all experienced something, and some of us experienced a great deal of some things. And so I like to be able to support that part of our population. And let's see. So some of my background, I worked in schools, nationally certified school psychologist. I'm a clinical professional counselor. I am a NICU psychologist and, again, a trauma psychologist. I am the co-chair of the National Network of NICU Psychologists. So we are working to kind of elevate the field of NICU psychology, expand it, let people know that it exists, advocate within hospitals for people to have access to NICU psychology, NICU mental health services for their infants and their families. At PlayfulLeigh Psyched, which is my private practice, we've been around. Our birthday is April 13th. So we're coming up on year 6. So we're going to be entering first grade. I like to think about it and graduated levels in that way. So we're really excited. And PlayfulLeigh Psyched, we really focus on trauma intervention, really from a social justice perspective. So we really think about those marginalized communities, people who have disabilities, people who are from racially marginalized and historically marginalized backgrounds, differences in languages and cultures. We really focus on people who have been minoritized in populations and supporting them through their trauma journeys and support and wellness. So we kind of, again, focus on all areas of trauma. We are 100% telehealth based. Really started that pre-pandemic. So whenever I tell people, they're like, what? So pre-pandemic, just been born out of, again, when you work with people who have experienced some traumas, one of the hugest barriers to getting support is actually access to care, being able to get to a session, being able to schedule those appointments and show up on it at a specific time through traffic or figuring out bus transportation or all those things. And I was like, you know what, we can do this and take away this barrier. So that's been really exciting to be able to do over time. And then, of course, the pandemic normalized it. So pandemic happened 2 years after we launched and started. And so then people were like, oh, you're right. This can happen and be really effective. And I'm like, I know. Like, hello. So we do lots of great work there. We do some parent-child work, adult survivors of trauma. We work with young children and children who have survived different things from the full spectrum. So we have all sorts of people that come to our practice. Hope that answered that question.
Yeah, that's so great. And it's been, just amazing to see that growth. And we'll get into a little bit as well about kind of your philosophy. Your private practice is called PlayfulLeigh Psyched. And so in a lot of your content, which I love, and we'll tag in your accounts if if you guys haven't seen already, PlayfulLeigh Psyched is across multiple platforms on social media as well. And you're always sharing really helpful content that we reshare regularly, focusing on, that element of play that I really, in my own parenting journey, when you're in the weeds of trauma and parenting and hard, and that connection of being a parent, that element of play sometimes gets lost and we forget that. So I'd love you to talk a little bit. I'd love for you to talk about, that philosophy and how, that interweaves with being trauma, a trauma professional as well.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for reminding me. Yes. PlayfulLeigh Psyched. How could I forget? It's the name of our practice. So play at its core is a healing tool, right? And it's also something that allows us to maintain some wellness, right? And there's fun to it, of course. So at PlayfulLeigh Psyched, one of the things that we specialize is actually in play therapy and filial therapy as well, which is a play-based family therapy where we actually get the parents involved. But throughout, we really support and when we're posting our content, we want play to be integrated into your life. So not just thinking about it from you're with a therapist, therapeutic approach, right? But the joy that is possible when we allow ourselves to play, right? And for parents and families, children, that's their actual first language across the universe, across cultures, across races. Play is a child's first language. It is how they understand the world, is how they experience us. They are trying to play. Even we've seen there are imaging. Babies are playing in the womb. They're figuring things out. They're moving around, right? There's playfulness even in that. And there are stages of play that happen for young children. Whether you're a child that has a disability or a child that's born free of disability, their play occurs throughout the population, right? And so tap into the first language that we've ever known, right? Allow us to pause there and enjoy those moments. And it can look very different across people, right? So I say I just want to play all day. If I could, I want to play all day, right? But sometimes that looks different. Sometimes that is literally like I'm watching my niece like enjoy the world, right? Like it's like so fun, like to see the world through her eyes is amazing. And I'm watching, but I'm playing. Sometimes it's active engagement in the actual, what looks like play. Sometimes it's, taking a walk and like noticing the flowers, right? And that playfulness of that. Or like, I used to love watching squirrels. They just seem so interesting, and like watching them, like, go back and forth up a tree. Like, what are they doing? Sewing things. And that's a way of being engaging in the nature in a playful way. Finding the joy and the funniness in, when you're experiencing trauma, right? Or when we're experiencing difficult things happening with your family, your children. There's so much. There's the busyness, there's the hectic of it, there's the chaos, right? And in between those moments, sometimes there's opportunities to laugh. Sometimes there's opportunities to play. Like we the old saying, like, don't cry over spilled milk, right? Sometimes you can laugh over spilled milk. Like sometimes you can just kind of laugh at yourself and like draw a picture in the milk. It's okay, right? So there's just so many, and the forgiveness of play that I love, right? Engaging in, sometimes things feel really big and they are important and they aren't the end all, right? And so having a playful nature allows you to like think back on like, what, this was not great. And also I can go enjoy XYZ thing that really like makes my heart jump and leap and, sing in that way. So play is in everything that I do. It's in everything. People know me. They'll say, oh, she's going to talk about play. Like it's very, very important. And what it looks like. And because play is a child's natural language, as adults, if we can continue to model that play is important, right? Guess what we're teaching to the children that we love so much? That they're allowed to have joy and fun within their lives at all points. There was a video that went viral maybe like 5-6 months ago of a little girl in the backseat of a car, and she is just going through it. She's crying. She's probably like 5 or 6 years old, and she's like, I don't want to be an adult. And she's like, I don't want to grow up. And her mom's like, well, why? She's like, because it doesn't look like it's fun. She's like, you all don't play, right? And her mom's like, yeah, sometimes it's not very fun. I understand. I want to be a kid too. But it's just that idea, like, adulting is what it is. And also we can still play, right? We can still have that.
I love that. That's so, I'm sure that is a message that everyone in our community needs to hear. And I'm so glad that we'll have this as a resource afterwards that people can go back to and watch and listen and remind themselves as well. We all need that, when, things are just coming at us from all sorts of different directions, that you can take those moments and really, give some balance to it. I just love that. That's so important. So let's go early into some of this in the lifespan and in child development, and talk about, like getting into the NICU side of things, of this work. And what are some ways that you've seen families cope during a NICU stay with trauma? And how, going through that, because we have families right now that join us that are in the NICU, super fresh, day 2, day 3, and their world has been completely turned upside down, and they're looking for an anchor and a light to help guide them in this very unexpected journey.
Yes. So the NICU, with all the love and care and support that it is, can be one of the most scary places on earth, right? Everyone who's ever experienced it can attest to that. One of the things that there's how people cope, and then there's ways that we would recommend people try to cope, right? And it's okay if you're in the stage. Again, there's the worry, there's the fear, there's the frustration, there's the anger. One of the things that can be really helpful is if you can find a space or a person that can let you express the anger. What can happen sometimes in the NICU, some NICU professionals as well, but just can happen in the NICU, is that people think that they're only allowed to either be crying and sad, or scared, or they have to be like completely positive, like the toxic positivity, like everything's okay, right? And what we found that what I have found working in the NICU is that parents really benefit from being able to talk to someone or say, like, I'm so angry, like, that this happened. This isn't fair. It's not fair that I was pregnant. I was with a group of people and we were pregnant at the same time and their babies are fine. I'm so angry at that. I'm not angry at them, but like, this shouldn't have happened to me. This shouldn't have happened to my baby, right? Sometimes expressing that takes that load off, right? Because you're holding it in, and we hold that stuff in, and it is toxic. So, a lot of times NICUs all NICUs, I think all NICUs across the country have social work, which is at least a starting point. And social work can usually, depending on the hospital, they might be able to provide services. They might have a group, but they're at least going to be able to tap you into resources. Many hospitals have the opportunity to create new groups, but then also tap you into other parents that have experienced the same thing. Hope for HIE is a wonderful resource, right? In that, looking at that parent support, because it can be great. I do what I do is I think it's very helpful. It's needed. And also there's nothing quite like that peer-to-peer support. And the earlier you can tap into that, someone who's experienced something similar to you, right? Some hospitals have a really great system where they are able to like pair like similar baby types, similar outcomes and things like that. That can be really great. There's also, Parent-to-Parent Network is one that is really good at that. That's a really great and important thing. So if you don't already know that that's available or that's possible, go to the social worker of the NICU, to talk to the bedside nurse, say, hey, I need to be able to talk to somebody that's experienced this. Do you have a network or a way I can outreach? Is there someone? There's usually people who have, on the other side of that, they will talk to the hospital and they want to be an advocate. They want to reach out to the family. So that's available at a lot of hospitals. across, not just the US, across the globe in some instances. Now, again, it varies, but, you know, a lot of people want to be able to give back. I would also say, be easy on yourself in the sense that sometimes when you're in the NICU in those first few days, people have to make really difficult decisions. People will say, do I go to the NICU now and use my like leave, right? My maternity leave, my paternity leave, whatever. Or do I not go to the NICU as much now, go to work, go back to work immediately so that when baby comes home, I can actually be with baby, right? And they have all feelings about how difficult that is to make and like the judgments that people will make. And what I want to say is you're going to make the right decision for you and your family, right? Don't let anyone tell you this is wrong. Don't do this or don't, yes, do that. You're going to make the right decision that's right for you and your family and your baby. That is a unique decision that no one can advise you good or bad, right or wrong on, right? Get to the NICU as much as you can, as often as you can, whatever that looks like for you, right? Baby will benefit from having that support. And also we understand if you want to wait till they're home, like to take off from work completely, right? That looks different. So kind of remembering that, you know, the decisions that you're making, and that's a hard thing. People will just feel like everything I'm going to decide is going to be wrong. Like, no, you know, guilt is a huge thing that comes up even when there's clearly, you know, there's nothing you could have done differently, but it will get in your mind that like, I should have done this. If I had just done this.
The what ifing, yes, is so, you know, all these themes that families go through. It's so tough.
So tough.
It doesn't matter how it happened. You still go through the what ifing.
You still go through it, right? And sometimes you need that voice to be like, this isn't your fault. This wasn't your fault, right? There's something you could have done. And that might not be as like, oh, okay, great. Wasn't my fault, right? But hearing that in repetition, sometimes helping yourself remember, like, I didn't actually do anything to deserve this, nor to cause this, right? And the time we spend in that what if and that guilt is time we're taking away from our ability to like be with our babies or be with our families and kind of get that support and care. What else? You said more coping. Is that what we're on?
Yep. Coping. And then, you know, moving kind of like what families as they get to discharge. And then, you know, we're working kind of through the experience, like how this changes, you know, through the experience of the NICU, getting to discharge and then transitioning to home. And just like all of the complexities that are filled with that.
Okay. So more coping is try to focus on your baby. And I know it sounds what? Of course, but the NICU, depending on what your NICU looks like, right? Open bay NICUs, there's pros and cons to all kinds of NICU setups. But one of the hard things about an open bay NICU is that the alarms, right? And sometimes there are emergency procedures that are happening right there in an open NICU where all the other babies are sharing. And so you're seeing some procedures happening on other babies, and then your body, so how trauma works, right? It doesn't matter that it's not happening to you or your baby. You can still have trauma symptoms from witnessing something happen to someone else's baby or family, right? Because your brain, your fear center is basically just like, that could happen to me. That's me. That's my baby. That's what's going to happen next. It's, you know, and so you're going to feel that, right? So with as much as possible, we want you to try to focus on your baby, what's happening in your section, right? Having books can be helpful. Having like being able to read to your baby, being able to listen to soft music, depending on your NICU. Headphones can sometimes be helpful. Ways that you can cope at bedside so that if you're there, that you're not also being traumatized by the other things that may be happening around you. If possible, developing a relationship with the bedside nurse. That I find has been such a difference for families when they like their nurse and they know the nurse. They feel so comforted because that nurse is going to be there for hours, right? That you're there and you can kind of feel like someone is caring for my baby that knows me and knows our family and really supporting our family. Ask questions. Most bedside nurses are okay with all the questions that you ask, right? And if they're not, go to the charge nurse. they're not okay with you asking questions, go to the charge nurse, right? It's okay for you to know, like, want to know what's going on with your baby, want to understand things. We have found that when parents feel knowledgeable, it lowers some of their anxieties, right? If they understand what, like, you can ask a bedside nurse, do you mind talking through the procedure you're doing right now, right? Just like say out loud the steps you're going to do. That can actually help a lot of families feel comforted. Like, oh, okay, they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this. Most nurses don't have a problem with it. Again, obviously, if there's something they're doing really quickly and urgently, then they might say, give me a second, and then they might do the thing, and then will usually tell you about it, right? But it can just be helpful to just know, like, okay, this is what's going to happen next. This is what they did last time. This is they're doing it differently. That can be really beautiful. Discharge planning. Back up one other thing. The other thing I always like to make sure we tell people, I think I told you this last time I came to the one to do live, is the whole idea for families who are choosing to nurse or breastfeed, the whole idea of pumping. Okay.
Yeah.
It's whatever you decide is perfectly okay. Some families, some people will feel like, well, this is what I can do. I can pump, so I'm going to pump. Right. And, but then there may be struggles about milk production, right? The sleep disruption, like they can't sleep through the night because they're trying to pump on the, like every 2 hours in the beginning and all the, and then that creates more guilt and anxiety. And then as we know that all that actually hurts milk production too. And so there's this horrible cycle that they get into. And so lactation consultants are wonderful and great and are supportive and are trying to do those things. And also at the end of the day, you got to do what you need to do to make sure that you're stable enough to be able to show up for baby and for yourself, right? There's this idea of like selflessness to the utmost power that happens when you have a child in the NICU. But forgetting that even in those earliest stages of life, baby is relying on you to learn what's called co-regulation, right? To learn that ability to soothe. They are relying on you to do that. So if you've like thrown that out the window so far that you can't reach it anymore, baby can't reach it either. Right. And so I know it's hard. I know people are like roll their eyes sometimes when they hear me say it, and I say it anyway, because eventually it'll get through. It is, when you're being in the NICU, it is very much like that. But what they tell you on a plane, if you've ever been on a plane, right? Please mask yourself before you mask the person or the children or the people that you're with, because if you pass out mid masking someone else, you don't have a mask, they don't have a mask, the oxygen is getting to nobody. Right? That is a core underpinning of what happens in the NICU. You have to remember that the way to be selfless is actually to be a little selfish, like, right? To be a little bit like, what do I need to feel rested, or to feel a little bit like, okay, what play or joy can I bring into this moment? What can I marvel at? So one of the things we'll encourage people to do is have a little baby journal at bedside, right? Notice the things. What was baby's, were you able to see baby's first diaper change? What are the things that you were able to do? What first time you held, or did I hold today? Those little things that you can note down are ways in which you can reflect on, like, okay, I was able to do this today. We had this time together. I read, I sang, I did X, Y, Z, right? Those really important moments.
Yeah.
Preparing for discharge. It's one of those things that can be so scary to people. Everyone wants it, right? Want it to happen. Like, yeah, we're going to discharge. And also it can be really scary. What we find for families is that after discharge, they think of everything, like we think, okay, discharge, I'll be okay, I'll figure this out. Actually, your anxiety goes up. Your trauma symptoms tend to go up after discharge. And I like to lead with, knowing that can also be helpful. Knowing what to look for, knowing what it's going to feel like can be helpful. Instead of just saying, oh yeah, you're discharging, it's great. But it's that idea of planning, like, okay, I am going to be going home, which means that I will not need the same level of monitoring that baby has needed, right? Being informed, being knowledgeable about, okay, what will we need, right? And kind of planning what that looks like at home. it's a lot of scheduling. It's a lot of like realizations. And what do I do if, right? Allowing yourself those questions. Okay, what if I do if, you know, have I asked the questions that I want to ask of the physician, of the discharge planning team? Did they meet with me? You know, unfortunately, there are some hospitals that, depending on language barriers, depending on, you know, systemic issues and discriminations, they don't do discharge planning well with certain families. So I love for families to know it is your right to have a discharge planning meeting and to ask all the questions that you want to ask. And so if that's not presented to you, like if you're just given a packet, you can actually request, oh, great, thanks for the packet. Also, I need a meeting to be able to go through some of this. It is your right. A lot of people don't know that. Sometimes people don't know that.
I think that's also a really good point, not just in the NICU setting, but, you know, we have a lot of families who experience recurring hospitalizations or unexpected hospitalizations. And, or even like, you know, you're getting discharged after a surgery and you have the same opportunity to say, I'm not comfortable yet. I don't feel like I know what, you know, this level of care at home to do. Can we have a meeting about it and being able to advocate for that? That's such, I think, a thread that we can bring, not just from, you know, NICU discharge, but any hospitalization, and thinking through our families that often feel like, you know, they've a lot of times experienced marginalization, experienced not great care before, not feeling heard, and being able to advocate for their needs and their child's needs as well. That is something that, regardless in the medical system, as you know, as families go in and out, have that ability to.
Yes, you're right. It extends right from a hospital perspective, a medical perspective. You always have because sometimes it does happen, right? They'll just like give you some paperwork like that says like, oh, it's all written up. Here's your discharge plan. No. You have a right to actually meet with the physician or a care team to say, go over some of these things with me. So absolutely.
That's such a huge advocacy point there for families to take note of, that is a right that you have to request that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would, again, know that. So sometimes you can always talk with some of your team members, like I think go back to social workers to to ask for it in advance, to ask for certain things in advance, like resources, right? And you might say like, I don't believe in therapy, or like, I don't need a support group, whatever. But I would say like, ask them to give it to you. Like, hey, are you looking into things just in case? Because what happens is, right, you might think like, I don't need these things. It's not going to happen to me. Not me. I'm fine. Some people will be like, trauma, like this was really hard. It wasn't good, but like, I'm not traumatized. That's only for like war vets, right? And it's like, it's not just for war vets. And you might not want to look at it right as soon as you get home, right? As soon as you're done discharging, but there may come a moment that you are having a hard time and you're like thumbing through things and you find, maybe I should reach out and call, right? One of the things that comes up, you're allowed, this is an advocacy thing, you're allowed to ask for and state what you need and what your fears are. When we think about like, you know, postpartum anxiety, depression, postpartum PTSD, it happens a lot with this population. One of the key things we find is that people will say, no one ever asked me, like really asked me how I was doing. I might have told them if they'd asked, right? They might have found me on the right moment and I might have said whatever. We know that thoughts of, thankfully it's not a huge rate of people who complete suicide, but we do know that the thoughts of suicide are really high when you have a baby that has medical fragility, right?
Well, and that was a point that I read, you know, when we talk out there in general, just talking about the maternal mortality crisis. And that was shocking to me to read on causation, because I was thinking, oh, it's got to be like high blood pressure that's not managed, things like that. And that suicide was actually like the top cause or one of the top causes. of death for in the maternal mortality crisis, which means that this is a significant mental health crisis as well, like in addition to not monitoring necessarily physical symptoms. And I mean, that was just a startling statistic for me to dig into more, trying to understand, where things are when people talk about this.
Yeah. And the reason why I was bringing that up, because I want you to be able to say like, hey, these are coming up for me.
Yeah.
The reason why it doesn't, especially in these populations, because your baby's already medically fragile. A lot of people have a fear of, are they going to take my baby away from me if I say this? Hopefully no. Like I would say, no, absolutely not. They're not supposed to. That's not supposed to be a reason that you would lose your child, especially if you're asking for help. But again, we know that if we ask, so if it's not you, if there are partners, if there are family members, if there are sisters and brothers or something on this live or that will watch this live, ask that question, right? Directly. And because there's help and support, but we have to know that those are the thoughts that are coming up.
Yeah.
Right. And it's such a complicated thing because there's those thoughts like, I just wish I wasn't here. This is so much. Right. But then usually there follows that guilt of like, how dare I like think this when my baby's sick, right? Or when my baby needs me or whatever. And it's like, mental health, there's so many facets and complications. It's a very complicated thing and it's never your fault. You're not purposely having these thoughts. You're not purposely experiencing any of this. And so, reaching out for support is really important. And I say that around discharge planning because that's a higher frequency of when it's going to happen within the first 6 months of discharging from from the NICU, but from a surgery, those things, that's when you're at the most elevated risk for attempting suicide. And people don't realize that. No one has talked about it. We're talking about it more now, right? But it's not something that people knew to be on the lookout for. So one of the things I usually try to do when I was working in the NICU is actually talk with families about, okay, things seem great. Even if I met with everybody, even if things seemed nice and good. And like we did screeners, we screened for anxiety, depression, and trauma, like PTSD with the primary caregivers. So it could be, 2 moms, 2 dads, mom and dad, grandma and mom, whatever the configuration was. And even if they came out with, within expectation limits, I would say, here's what might happen within 6 months. Here's the things you might feel, right? You might start feeling immense anxiety. You might start having all these worry feelings, or you might feel lower than you've normally felt before. And that may be more difficult to get out of bed. You might hear baby crying and not want to go towards baby, right? It may become more difficult to pick up baby or hold baby. You might feel more anger than you realize you felt. Like some of these things might come up. And if you start feeling these things for an uncomfortable amount of time, please check in with someone, go to your physician, go to a friend, go to someone that can be really help you with.
Well, we've talked about that too. I know before of like looking at, families need, and to your point, like to have an understanding of where they can go, whether that is peers, where, within like a diagnosis framework, while, a professional, and that, we continue to bust these stigmas, and that we look at like, non-birthing partners who are also, at high risk of developing PTSD, and that you can't, like PTSD is post-trauma. So these 6 months to a year, except post-trauma, like is when these symptoms can develop and often do in our community. And then when we look at, like how, the cycle sometimes can weave throughout these different, throughout childhood for so many of these kids, and parenting kids who have more medical complexity. And, we call it kind of like the diagnosis loop where, every time you're getting a new diagnosis is another re-traumatization and like another going through this cycle that families go through. And that, parenting in this long haul is trying to find, your way through, the NICU obviously can be a time, but there's plenty of, events or, timeframes just with how kids develop and when some of these things might get diagnosed that are, outcomes of HIE, additional diagnoses that, that families find themselves in, in these different situations. And then, these things are brought up. We had a great comment and question from a parent who says, his daughter's now 4 and she has a home pulse ox, and those beeps, like are a trigger from the NICU, and he's trying to live with that now, age 4. And like, how, he's like, he said, I feel like we can never escape the beeps. Like, so, I know we talk a lot about like, as people are transitioning at home, and then let's kind of shift into, how families see, trauma manifest kind of into this longer haul outside of that acute medical period that, that families experience this.
Absolutely. And I apologize. There seems to be some type of work that's just happening. I don't know if you can hear that in my background, but
nope,
okay,
all good.
Good. I love that. I love that parent brought that up, because yes, the beeps, right? Trying to escape those beeps is really hard. What we want to happen is there to be some type of desensitization to the beeps, and saying that like in the NICU, those beeps could mean really scary things, right? And they can sometimes still mean those really scary things at home. But we want to, in general, there's still a beep that's happening, even when there's the regulatory beep, right? Yeah. When you first go into the hospital setting, all the beeps are scary. Like, oh my gosh, what is happening? We want you to know that there's a regulatory beep, that it's almost like a heartbeat, right? It's just that regulation. Have the playfulness of it. Think about, can you put it to a song? We'll tell parents, like, is there a beat that goes with a song that you can think about when you're hearing some of those, right? How do you make it playful? How do you bring yourself back to the now? Because trauma exists and lives in the past, and it impacts us and impedes us in the now, right? Anxiety lives in the potential future that may never happen, and it impacts us in the now, right? It's trying to impact us in the now. But if we can focus on the now, today, in this moment, those things don't exist then, because they don't time travel the way we think they do, right? Here in this moment, you're safe. Here in this moment, when you hear that beep, your child is okay, right? And so it is that trying to bring yourselves back to this mindful moment, this piece here, trying to engage in some of that play. Well, I talked about this a little bit even when you're in the hospital, but when you're home, sometimes people feel a lot of support if they can join a support group of parents that are now have transitioned home, or peers, like your child's peers, if they're into any type of, there's sometimes HIE has groups and meetups and things like that. And so being able to kind of connect with those families to normalize some of that experience can kind of take away the trauma symptoms. When we think about, what you're looking for in some of that symptomatology, so put aside the fact that as an HIE parent, sleeping is hard. I get it, right? It can be hard. It can be, because there's all sorts of complications. There's seizures that can occur in the middle of the night, right? There's some people can temporarily stop breathing. There's a lot of different things that can occur depending on your child's presentation of HIE. So we're going to put that aside. But when we think when we think about symptoms, difficulty sleeping outside of what is considered it is okay to think about, like, I need a check in the middle of the night. You're still checking. Like, HIE parents they may always have more of a schedule that in the middle of the night, they're going to go check on their child, right? Outside of that, right? So is your disrupted sleep because you're having dreams, or you're still thinking about the times when your child was hospitalized for something, right? Can you not really quite settle on ed because those kind of thoughts are coming back to you? If so, you might need some support with that, right? You might need some intervention for that. One of the hugest things that we can say, if you have multiple children, are you overprotective in kind of all areas of your parenting? So overprotective parenting can result from having a child that was hospitalized, that had the hospitalization, right? And they call it vulnerable child syndrome. And so it basically is, they frame it for the child, but it really looks at the parents' behaviors. So it's the child that has been hospitalized for whatever reasons, right? And then they're out of the hospital. So being out of the hospital, again, usually means it's step down care. Like they don't need that level of intensity. But are you still parenting to the level of intensity that a child that was hospitalized needed, right? Which then can inadvertently, stunt some of the developmental process that the child could make, because you're kind of covering over parenting in that way. If you are catching that, or people are saying like that you could, like, that's okay. Like this is normal, or like this is allowed to happen right now. And you're still like, but no, but like when we were there, or like you're still viewing that child as very, very fragile when they're a little bit less fragile now. That is a symptom, like the trauma symptom, right? And something you want to look at that can happen. Yeah, the overprotectiveness, because that can look different, like who is accessing child in ways that you probably wouldn't have been had they not been hospitalized. And then again, looking at your discharge planning. So sometimes in that, if you have a really thorough, they'll tell you the levels of access that people can have to your child, or what that looks like, right? Are you then saying, I want it to be the same level that we had at the hospital? You are still scrubbing down, you're still doing this, you're still doing that, right? And it's like, I get it, right? You're trying to keep your child safe within reason, right? And also the professionals have gently told you that that level of need is no longer there.
Yeah.
Right. And you might be stuck back in that hospitalized framework. To the extent that you can, I'm always thinking about it, taking time for yourself, whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to be. When I say that, people are like, I can't take a week-long vacation. No. Breathe. Hold up. Back up. This is, what this looks like for you, right? Could be 5 minutes. It could be an hour. It could be, if you have a support system, use your support system, right? If you have people that are willing and capable and able to give you 5-10 minutes, do that. If you have, some people go into like, I got to do it all. Right. If you have people that are willing to cook you a meal, or send you a gift card, or DoorDash you some food or something, yes, take it. If you have people that are like, hey, what do I need? What if someone's asking you, what do you need? And you're like, oh, I'm fine. No, you're not. You're not fine. It's okay not to be fine. So one of the things I'll say to people who struggle with telling people what they need, or who struggle with just saying I'm fine, create, in those moments when things are hard, create a list of things, like I wish list. Like, I wish someone would do my laundry. I wish someone would cook dinner. I wish someone would, play with my child for a few minutes so that I could just like have a glass of wine, or do whatever the case may be, right? Write that list out, put it on your refrigerator. When someone comes over who's like, is there a way I can help? You can say, there's a list, pick one. If you're able to pick one of something on the list, go for it. Over time, people will notice to just go to your refrigerator. I say refrigerator, but like it could be anywhere that you feel comfortable in your home, right? But that can be a way to, people can look, you're like, oh, I can fold some laundry for you. Like, sure, I can fold some clothes, some kiddo clothes or something, right? Because people who care about you want to help, and people who care about your child, they want to help. They just don't know how. And so having that list can be really helpful.
Well, and that's such a really interesting topic too, because we have a lot of families that will talk and share in our community about the different levels that they might have of support. And also, like, I don't know, like, society is hard right now. We used to be more centralized and have this like village of support and things like that. And, our families often, there's so many different family dynamics that exist in different, areas that people live in, or access to support. And sometimes, it's a matter of figuring out like how you can cultivate that as well. And it's tough. That's another thing to add to your list sometimes to do. And, I'll say, like, Max is almost 12, my oldest, who, was born with HIE. And we're like just getting some of that built-in village that we've been cultivating over several years. as our family dynamics have shifted with support, like aging parents or parents passing away who helped before, and now, we have neighbors that say, have said in the past couple months, can you teach me, what Max might need during a seizure? Because if you're not here or, like you need something, I want to be able to step in and help. Like that is new for me to have someone just like offer something that really looks like tangible support of like, of being able to intervene in a medical emergency for our family, and thinking through what that might look like for other people, and where there might be support that you may least expect it, that can be really helpful as well as, as things grow and change. And, and our families find a lot of times they might get a lot of support when their baby is really young. And then as they grow and have medical complexities, like it feels like it's less and less. And again, like, family, like, that sandwich generation situation of raising your kids and with aging parents, or you're a single parent, there's all sorts of different ways that these things shift, but how people can cultivate that support in those moments as well as those shift.
Exactly. Which is it's a beautiful thing. Like you say, you're cultivating those relationships as you grow and as time goes on. A lot of people, right? People have like a lot of support sometimes when the child's a baby, or like the first month or two home, which sometimes is not even when you want it. Sometimes, again, that's when you're still trying to create that bubble, and we're like, but we want to be in the bubble with you. And then I think that, for all those different reasons you mentioned, and then also I think sometimes people don't realize that you still need ongoing help and support, or that would be helpful. Sometimes people think like, oh, you're used to this now, so you've got it, and you don't, you don't need me or whatever. You don't need that support, and it's like, I still need help. Like this is a lifelong thing. A child is born and then it's a lifelong needs. Right. And so, I think sometimes people just hearing that and being able to normalize saying that, like, yeah, like, what are you comfortable with? Can you help in some ways? That's okay if you can't, right? You can have those relationships where they're not able to help, but like if they are willing and able, sometimes they just need to know that help is needed.
Yeah, that's such a important point. There's a question that came in that I think is really a good one to ask you. What are this parent that just asked, what are different ways to respond to people who are asking, how are you doing? Obviously, many of us aren't fine, but how do you respond properly without having to lie and without having to disclose too much and just like trauma dump, which in this question, I think is asked very often. And people have this feeling very often in our community.
Yes, they do. I think it's a problem societally, like, especially in the US. I've heard that some other countries and some European countries, they don't have this, but they don't even ask the question, but we'll say, how are you, as a greeting. Right? Like, we don't care. You'll be walking around down the street with someone, you're like, oh, how are you? And we're like, oh, hi, how are you? And then you've kept going. Clearly, like, you didn't care how I was doing because you're still walking in the opposite direction. So I love that. I love that multifaceted of like, how do you not lie? How do you not trauma dump? And how do you be authentic to you? So what I usually recommend, right, especially depending on how well you know these people, the person that you're talking with, is ask the question back. I know we can't, not supposed to answer a question with a question, but ask the question back. Are you asking me like just to shoot the breeze? Like, is this a greeting? Or are you asking me because you want to really know and can handle whatever response I give you? Right. I think this is really easier to do when you've cultivated some like close relationships with people, but I'm also like kind of a direct person. And so I do this with people regardless. So take that with a grain of salt. But because I want to know, right? And it helps people. Sometimes people are like, oh, right? Like they'll kind of think about it a bit and they're like, well, I think I really want to know, right? So that'll be the first thing. If you know someone really wants to know, and you think this is a safe person, I would start with something small. So I wouldn't try to like give them all the things. And I might say, you know what, today is a really hard day. I'm not doing so great today. It's just been a really hard day. And I would see where they can go with that conversation, right? I think the closer you are with someone, you can start to gauge how hard that day is going in those details, or how hard the time has been, or, you might be in a bout where there's, again, been some more seizures or been some other things happening, that you want to go into detail, and you could do that once you know the person well. But I would just start with are you at like, oh, thank you so much for asking me that. Are you really asking just as a part of the conversation, small talk, or are you really curious and want to support to know how I'm doing? It's something that's so simple, but I'm always about clear communication, and that has to be cultivated and learned in and of itself, right? Like, we have to learn how to do that. Because I think that most of the time people, they don't care. I don't want to seem that crass, but like, it's just a greeting.
Yeah.
It's just something you say, versus like, no, I have the time and emotional capacity to like handle whatever you bring. If you tell me you're ecstatic about whatever, I can handle that. If you tell me that you're like really, really sad and angry, whatever, I can handle that too, and everything in between. It depends on the person. And I think that what I would love to see the world do, and I would love to see happen in your communities, is for people to then start to be more thoughtful about whether or not they're going to ask that question. Because if they feel like they can't handle your response, then they shouldn't be asking the question in the first place. Right. And I love the fact that you don't want to lie about it, right? Because we do. That's what we do. I'm fine. And you're like, like,
I'm fine.
So far from fine. Right? Like, so far from fine. So it's really important to start to cultivate the relationships so we can have an honest response.
Yeah. Wow. We have covered so much ground. And I could talk to you forever about this. I know this is like I mean, probably number one topic for families often is just like, dealing with the re-traumatization and like, it starts and you think back, like, and you thought like, oh, the NICU was really hard. That was like and for some people that might be like the hardest part of their journey, and everyone has different hards, and they're all valid. And then the families that go on with these different re-traumatizations, and it doesn't even have to be related to their child. It could be, again, the loss of a parent or a spouse or whatever, and experiencing a hardship and going, wow, these hard things just keep happening, and that we have to somehow move forward, with that and build, we talk about, or the world talks about resiliency a lot. And sometimes I feel like, so many of our families are like, I'm resilient enough. Like I'm done. I've had enough. Resilience building for a lifetime. But, that's where, and you can't just like pour notions of self-care like on it, like what would be your recommendation for families that, they're feeling just this, significant burnout of like, I just can't take another thing coming my way.
Yeah, I think one of the things it's a couple of things you said, but one of the things is like, so self-care isn't what we really know that can be super, super helpful across communities is community care. And that's what we've talked about, like that level of support, that community care, right? Because you can do all these things for yourself, but part of the issue with parenting through trauma is you are doing so much, right? So just caring for yourself is one other thing to do, right? And it's really about trying to cultivate in whatever ways you can to that community of care, right? And that's where that piece comes in of trying to have people around you where you can be honest.
Yeah.
And what I find is when people don't even realize it until they've experienced it. Sometimes just being able to tell someone you're not okay makes you feel a little bit better. Doesn't make it go away, but just knowing that someone was able to like hear that, receive that, validate that, right? Because there's some things they can't do, right? They can't undo the things. They can't go back in time and, oh, hey, your child won't have experienced HIE, your child won't have been in the hospital. They can't do that, right? But sometimes it's just knowing that you aren't alone and how you're feeling is valid. And it's okay to feel what you're feeling, and knowing that someone just there, like we call it be with, someone who just be with you in the hard moment can be so cathartic and therapeutic.
Absolutely.
Right? So that community care that is so important to try to tap into whenever you can. And I get it that some people don't have a support system in that way. So that's when we look at these other organizations that can really help provide you with some of those people to talk to provide you with some of that validation, some of that support. We talked about what is it? Parent to parent. What did I just say?
Yep. Yeah.
Yes, parent to parent. NICU to home is something that's coming out. One of the places that I love is also Postpartum Support International. They have a lot of free support groups. They have a NICU support group. They have a parenting through trauma. They have a bunch, right? And they're always free. So that's a really great one. The National Perinatal Network, National Perinatal Association, NPA, which is what our organization is under. They have a lot of wonderful resources. So I would go to some of those. Again, if the types of services that your child is getting, a lot of them will have resources that they might not remember to share with you if you ask for them, right?
Yes. And they assume that you have had that before. I think there's like so much assumption. And like, yeah, local school districts, like a lot of our kids getting, will get enrolled in early intervention and work through like the special education pathway, 0 through sometimes age 26, not realizing that many of these, local school districts and school authorities have social workers, have parent groups, and if they don't, many times they want to start them and are willing to start them as well, and can connect you to local parents that have been there, done that. It's a federally funded program. The Parent Information Hub it's through IDEA, so the Individual with Disabilities Act in Education, right? I'm probably
IDEA, yeah.
IDEA, there we go.
And Education Act.
And so there, every state, every region has access to parent mentors through that, which can be a huge support as well. Not just on special education issues or information, but on community support and looking at that as well. And to plug our social worker, Haley, we have a social worker on staff. Anyone can reach out to her at HIE.support, and she can look at your local area, anywhere around the world actually, and see if there is another community-based organization that you can tap into for some of that support, whether that's mental health, family support, all of that. So please use those resources. And speaking of resources, we're going to segue into the last question. Okay. So you mentioned some of these resources, so you mentioned like NPA as one of your favorites and Postpartum Support International. Are there any others that we didn't cover in that?
I think we've covered NICU Parent Network. I think we said that one.
Yep.
I just lost us. Oh, there we go. They can be a good one. What is it? Hand to Hold. Hand to Hold can be a really good one. And again, you just mentioned them. There's so many that are like locally based that I wouldn't know about, but you can go through your school district, they will have them. If your child is in speech therapy, if your child has OT, they often have resources. They just may not remember to like give you, or they might assume, like you said before, that you've already gotten it and they don't want to repeat anything. But you might have gotten it, and like that was 3 years ago, and now you and you didn't need it then, and so now it's away somewhere and didn't make it into like your parenting, like your binder things, and now you need it again. So like it's okay, and you can ask. So I would be tapping into your the pediatrician, of course, may have some resources, maybe not them directly, but even talking to their admin team, the front desk staff, right? They usually will have things that they might not. Again, things pop up, like you said, organizations can pop up again, or parents will reach out and say, you know what, I had this experience and my child is now 15 and I want to like be able to support people who are going through that, 10, 11, 12-year-old period because that was hard for us or whatever. So always re-engaging in that way can be super helpful. And then a lot of hospitals, even though like the NICU might have been where it maybe started for you, people will go back to the NICU to years later. And sometimes some NICUs will have like meetups and groups and things like that, and they'll advertise about those, and then you can get additional resources by attending one of those things. So that's another great way if your NICU has that, or just inquiring, is that possible? Or like, hey, you might be able to set one up if they don't already have it.
That's such a good point. We're actually working on building a hospital ambassador program, and in our pilot that we're working on, they don't currently have like an HIE specific meetup. There's some that will do NICU reunions, and some that actually have focused on HIE in particular. But that's also an option, is to go back to that NICU and ask and say, hey, I'd like to, sometimes it takes you being a volunteer to help organize. And that's how that can work, but you don't have to do it alone. Most times there's either other parents that are able to help, or staff, or they can allocate some other volunteer services throughout the hospital and say, hey, I think this would be a great idea. I'd be happy to, help be on a committee to help make it happen. And many times those hospitals, NICUs are willing and happy to include and to host something in their, for a meetup, for a support group, or just, again, a meetup and playground or reunion sort of situation as well.
And then the last piece, I think that a lot of families have told me that one of the places that has been so helpful for them are finding Facebook groups, and like people who've experienced the same things, or had like similar presentations for their children. So like, apparently Facebook groups are super helpful. Can be super helpful. Yeah.
We have over 100 of them.
There you go.
Yes. Yeah. And that's always the goal, right? Is you want to be able to connect. And if you can't connect in person, like connecting online is a way that people can start those relationships and start getting that peer support for sure. So, well, gosh, we covered so much in an hour. Thank you so much for sharing all that you do, and your, being a champion of families in the NICU and beyond, not only in your practice, like moving forward the field of NICU psychiatry or psychology. Yes, wrong one. But also, obviously the spirit of play. I hope everyone that watches this has a little bit of a nugget of want to make something playful today with your kid, with your family. We do a lot of dance parties in our family,
I love it.
Yeah, and it really does break that tension often, and because this life can be very hard, and there's lots of competing priorities and lots of things going on. So I want to thank you on behalf of all of our families for today in this Q&A, and being on our medical advisory board, and all you do for the families you work with, and spreading that playful energy. We had some really great questions. So families, thank you so much for your participation today. We'll have this, of course, as an evergreen resource across our social media channels. Deanna always turns these into a key takeaway blog and key takeaways on social as well. So if you want the Reader's Digest version of it as well, that will be available. And Dr. Dowtin, thank you so much for everything again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This has been lovely, and ask me back anytime.
Thank you. All right. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye.